My name is Evelyn Harper, and I turned 68 last March. I've lived in Riverview, Louisiana, all my life. Same house, same creaky porch. Same oak tree that's been leaning toward the river since before my daddy was born. That morning, I wasn't dressed for anything more than a quiet day at home. My soft blue cardigan, an old pair of sandals, hair pinned back in the laziest knot. I hadn't even put on lipstick, which for a Southern woman is saying something. I woke up with this odd, restless tug in my chest, like a little voice whispering I ought to check on something at the bank. Not fear, just insistence. The First Southern Credit Union was 6 minutes down River Street, the same place my late husband Jack and I had used for over 40 years. As I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, I thought about how strange it was for a Thursday. When I stepped inside, I didn't expect to see Daniel Pierce, my son-in-law, standing near the far desk in a crisp navy suit he only wears when he's selling something or trying to look important. He was speaking to the branch manager in that practiced, polite tone that never fooled me, not even when he first asked to marry my daughter Lauren. I slowed, staying just behind a decorative planter. I wasn't hiding, not exactly, but something about the way Daniel held himself made me pause, and then I heard it. Her name is Evelyn Harper. We've been managing her affairs for some time now. She doesn't recognize her own family anymore. The doctors say it's progressing quickly. I froze. That was my name, my age, my life. Coming out of the mouth of a man I'd fed gumbo to every Christmas for 15 years. I stepped out from behind the planter, my sandals clicking against the tile just loud enough to turn their heads. Daniel's face drained of color. The branch manager blinked like he'd just seen a ghost. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady but cold. Daniel opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. "No. Don't start spinning your story before I've had my coffee." I turned to the manager. "I'm Evelyn Harper. This is my account. I am not under any medical guardianship, and I certainly recognize every member of my family." The manager looked from me to Daniel, clearly unsure what to do. Daniel tried again. "Evelyn, I was just what?" I cut in, trying to bury me while I'm still breathing. The silence in that lobby felt heavier than Louisiana humidity in August. The manager slid a folder toward me without a word. My fingers didn't shake as I took it, but my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Inside were documents I'd never seen, stamped and notarized, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my own life. My daughter and Daniel named as my legal guardians, indefinitely. I didn't say another word. I walked past Daniel, out into the hot morning air, and the sunlight felt strange on my skin, like the whole world had shifted half an inch while I wasn't looking. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I parked a few blocks from the house and sat in my car, the folder on the passenger seat like a live grenade. Outside, the streets of Riverview were just waking up, neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bikes, someone hauling a cooler toward the river. All of it looked so normal. But nothing felt normal. My mind replayed every little moment from the past year, the way Daniel started calling me ma'am instead of Evelyn. The Thanksgiving dinner I wasn't up for hosting anymore. The doctor's visits where my own copies of test results stopped showing up in my mailbox. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the morning heat had turned thick and heavy. The hydrangeas by the porch, Lauren always promised to water them, drooped in the sun. A small package leaned against the screen door, the orthopedic sandals I'd ordered last week. I stepped into the kitchen and placed the folder on the table. The papers stared back at me, black ink and official seals telling a story I'd never agreed to star in. I traced the edge of one notarized page with my finger, reading the words mentally incompetent like they'd been branded into my skin. I didn't hear the car pull up at first. Only when the front door opened did I look up to see Lauren, my only daughter, stepping inside with her purse slung over her arm. She smiled at me until her eyes landed on the folder. Something flickered across her face. Not guilt, not yet. Fear. "Where did you get that?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just sat there waiting. Lauren took a slow step toward the table, eyes locked on the folder like it might leap up and bite her. Mom, she started, her voice careful. I can explain. I leaned back in my chair. Then you'd better start. She rubbed at her temple, glancing toward the door, as if Daniel might walk in and rescue her. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Daniel thought we thought it would just be protection. In case something happened. In case. I lifted one of the stamped pages and held it between us. Lauren, these papers say it already happened. They say I'm gone. They say I don't even know who you are. Her mouth opened, then shut again. I set the page down slowly. You didn't ask me if I felt confused. You didn't come to me if you were worried. You decided, without me, that I was done. She swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe it. She murmured. I thought if we never used the paperwork, it wouldn't matter. But you signed it, I said flatly. Her eyes dropped. You taught your daughter. I nodded toward the framed photo of my granddaughter on the counter. That it's fine to betray someone quietly, as long as you smile while you're doing it. Her lips trembled, but she didn't deny it. You've always been so strong, Mom. You never ask for help. I thought if something happened, we'd be ready. No, I replied, my voice low but steady. You weren't getting ready. You were getting rid of me. For a long moment, the only sound was the tick of the kitchen clock. Then I pushed back my chair and stood, my shadow stretching across the table between us. This ends now. The papers, the lies, all of it. She looked up at me, eyes wide. What are you going to do? I reached for the folder, tucking it under my arm. I'm going to remind you, and your husband, that age doesn't mean surrender. And I'm going to make sure no one speaks for me who wouldn't fight for me. Lauren didn't follow me as I walked out of the kitchen. She just stood there, still clutching the hem of her sweater, staring at the empty space where the folder had been. Outside, the sun was high, the air thick with the smell of river mud and blooming magnolia. I took a deep breath and started toward my car. If they thought I wouldn't notice, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. By the time I pulled out of the driveway, the sun had turned Riverview's narrow streets into a shimmer of heat and glare. I didn't have a plan, not yet, but I knew the first step was not to go home and stew. I drove straight to the library. Not because I needed books, but because it was quiet, and the parking lot was almost always empty mid-morning. I sat in the shade of a live oak, flipped open my old flip phone, and stared at the contact list. First number, Richard Coleman, my attorney of 22 years. I hadn't called him since Jacksville was settled. Evelyn, he said when he picked up, voice warm but puzzled. It's been a long time. It has, I said, and I'm afraid that means you're about to get busy again. I told him about the bank, about Daniel, about the documents with my name, and a lie stamped across the top. He didn't interrupt, just listened, the way good lawyers do when they're taking mental notes. I want 3 things, I finished. 1, revoke every guardianship claim, permanently and retroactively. 2, a forensic audit of every account tied to my name in the last 12 months. 3, a new will, no half measures. He cleared his throat. And your beneficiaries. My granddaughter, Nora, I said. She's 12, still honest, for now. But there will be conditions. As for Lauren and Daniel, I let the silence finish the sentence for me. Come in this afternoon, he said. Bring the documents. The second call was to Ellen Grant, a financial advisor I hadn't needed since Jack passed. She remembered me immediately. I need all online banking passwords changed, automatic transfers reviewed, and anything linked to Daniel's business account shut down, I told her. Her tone sharpened. Today. An hour ago, if possible. By the time I hung up, the heat in my chest wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, sharper. Resolve. At 3:15 p.m. I was sitting across from Richard's oak desk, the bank folder spread between us. He leafed through every page without a word. When he finished, he looked up at me. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "do you want to press charges?" I smiled, but it wasn't a kind one. "Not yet. But I do want the kind of paper trail they can't burn." When I got back to the house just after 5, their cars were already in the driveway. Lauren was on the couch, legs tucked under her like she was watching a Sunday movie, but her posture was stiff. Daniel stood by the fireplace, pacing in slow, tight circles, his phone clutched in one hand. The moment I stepped inside, he didn't even let me close the door. "Why did you cut the account?" he demanded. I set my bag on the kitchen counter and took my time answering. "Because it's mine." Lauren's eyes darted to the folder still under my arm. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We were trying to help you," he said, voice rising. I walked into the living room and faced him square on. "Help me, by standing in a bank and declaring me mentally gone, by forging access to my accounts, by making decisions about my life in rooms I was never invited into." He took a step closer, but I didn't move. "We had documentation, medical input. We didn't do this on a whim." "Who filled out those evaluations?" I asked. He hesitated, and that was all the answer I needed. "You mean the memory screening from last year?" "The one I passed. The one where the doctor said I was sharper than half the people my age." Daniel's lips thinned. Lauren shifted in her seat, like she wanted to say something but didn't know whose side to take. I stepped closer to them both. "You didn't do this because I'm ill. You did it because I'm inconvenient. Because I ask questions. Because you can't make this house or my money yours as long as I'm still here, breathing and paying attention." Lauren's voice broke. "Mom, please, we weren't going to use it." "Yes, you were," I said. "You were just waiting for the first slip you could twist into proof." The silence was so thick I could hear the faint tick of the mantel clock. Then I tapped the folder with my fingertip. "This is over, legally, permanently. And starting tomorrow, you'll be out of my house." Daniel's head jerked up. "You're evicting us?" "No," I said, my voice steady as stone. "You evicted yourselves the day you tried to erase me." Daniel's mouth twisted into a smirk he couldn't quite pull off. "You wouldn't actually kick out your own daughter." I walked to the hallway cabinet, pulled out a thick envelope, and set it on the coffee table between us. The crisp letterhead of Richard Coleman's office stared up at them. "This," I said, "is a formal 30-day eviction notice. Sign this afternoon. By the end of next month, you'll both be gone." Lauren's face went pale. "Mom, what about Nora? Where will she sleep?" I reached into my bag and took out a second, smaller folder. "This," I said, handing it to her, "is a trust I set up today in her name. It's modest, but it's hers, separate from anything you two have touched. She's not responsible for your choices, but she will learn from them." Lauren's hands trembled as she opened it. Daniel stayed standing, arms crossed, his glare burning into me. "You think this makes you a hero?" "No," I said calmly. "It makes me a woman who's done apologizing for having boundaries." For a moment, nobody moved. Then I looked straight at Lauren. "You didn't just lose your claim to my house or my accounts today. You lost my trust. And trust isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. If you want it back, the work starts far from here." The clock ticked in the silence that followed. I picked up my bag, walked toward my room, and didn't look back. They had 30 days. I had my life back. The moving truck pulled up just after sunrise. Its engine rattled in the still morning air, drowning out the usual chorus of cicadas and mockingbirds. I watched from my kitchen window as Daniel stepped out first, wearing that same stiff navy suit jacket like it was armor. Lauren followed, her hair tied back, face pale against the early light. They didn't look at me when they came inside, just moved around the house like strangers lifting boxes, stacking them by the door. The rooms echoed without conversation. Nora came last, clutching a stuffed rabbit so worn the seams looked ready to give. She walked straight to me in the kitchen and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Can I still visit?" she asked, her voice small. I bent down to her level. "Anytime, sweetheart. This will always be your grandma's house." She hugged me tighter. And I let her. I could smell her shampoo, that faint scent of strawberries that clung to the top of her hair. When she finally pulled away, she looked older somehow, not in her face but in her eyes, like she'd learned something too soon. Lauren lingered in the hallway, holding her purse like a shield. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "Good," I replied. "You'll spend less time waiting for it, more time earning it." For a moment, she looked like she might say something else, but she didn't. She just nodded once and stepped outside. Daniel didn't say goodbye. He didn't even glance back as he carried the last box to the truck. I stood in the doorway, watching them load up, the tires crunching against the gravel as they pulled away. The quiet that followed was different. Not the razor-sharp silence of betrayal, but the soft, steady quiet of a space finally mine again. I opened the windows. The warm southern air drifted in, carrying the scent of magnolia from the yard. I made tea, sat in my armchair, and let the sunlight fall across my lap. On the side table, my journal lay open. I picked up a pen and wrote, "Let no one speak for you who wouldn't fight for you." I folded the page and slipped it into the front pocket. A note for Nora one day. If she ever asks me who taught me that, I'll tell her the truth her mother did. The hard way. It was 2 weeks after they'd gone when the phone rang. Not the cell phone, the old landline in the hallway that I almost never used anymore. The ring startled me. It had that sharp, metallic chime that feels out of place in a quiet house. I picked it up, half expecting a telemarketer. "Mrs. Harper," a man's voice said, low and deliberate. "This is she. This is Franklin Rhodes. I don't believe we've met, but I was a friend of your late husband." Jack. The name sat on my tongue, like something I'd heard once in passing but couldn't place. My fingers tightened around the receiver. "Go on." "I'm calling because Jack asked me to contact you if certain things happened. He was worried you might be vulnerable. He said if Daniel Pierce ever got too close to your finances, I should reach out." A cold ripple passed through me, settling somewhere deep in my chest. Jack said that. Yes, Mom. And from what I just heard through a mutual acquaintance at the bank, sounds like the time came. I leaned against the wall, the receiver warm against my ear, the hallway suddenly feeling smaller. "What exactly did Jack tell you?" Franklin hesitated, then said, "He kept an account. Not in his name, not in yours. A safety net. He didn't want you to know unless you needed it, because he thought you might refuse to touch it out of pride." I closed my eyes. Jack always did know me too well. "And how much is in this account?" "Enough to make sure no one can ever put you in a corner." Franklin replied. His voice softened. "But you'll need to move quickly. If Daniel's been sniffing around, he might have already found traces." The call ended with instructions. A time, a location, a stack of documents I'd need to sign. When I hung up, I just stood there, staring at the old oak floorboards. Part of me wanted to cry, not from relief, but from the sudden flood of memories. Jack's laugh, the way he'd squeeze my hand under the table when we played cards with friends, his habit of planning for storms even on sunny days. Another part of me was angry. Angry that he'd kept this from me, that he'd been worried enough about Daniel and Lauren to make such arrangements years before I'd even noticed the cracks. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, but didn't drink it. I just stared at it, my reflection warped in the glass. The betrayal from Lauren still sat in me like a bruise, tender, dark, slow to fade. But now, layered on top, was something else, the realization that Jack had seen it coming. And maybe I had too. The next morning I was up before the sun. Not because I couldn't sleep, though that was true, but because my mind was already pacing before my feet ever touched the floor. I showered. Dressed in my navy blouse and pressed slacks, the ones I used to wear to Sunday service when I still felt like going. Then I put on my late mother's pearl earrings. The meet up Franklin had arranged wasn't in some anonymous office downtown. It was in the back room of Mayfield's Diner, a place Jack and I had eaten at more times than I could count. That choice was deliberate, neutral ground, public enough to feel safe, private enough to talk. When I walked in, the smell of frying bacon hit me first, followed by the faint tang of coffee burned down to its last hour. The waitress behind the counter glanced up, recognition flickering in her eyes, but she didn't call my name. She just gave me the smallest nod and tilted her head toward the rear. Franklin Rhodes was waiting in a booth with a briefcase beside him. He was older than I'd pictured, maybe mid-70s, with the kind of upright posture that tells you a man hasn't lost his edge. His white shirt sleeves were rolled up to the elbow, and a plain gold wedding band gleamed on his left hand. "Mrs. Harper," he said, standing as I approached. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent a lifetime making decisions that mattered. "Evelyn," I corrected gently as I slid into the booth. "We're past formalities." He gave a faint smile and sat down, unclipping the briefcase. Inside was a neatly stacked set of folders, each bound with a rubber band. The top one was marked with my name. Not Evelyn Harper, but Evelyn Grace Whitmore. My maiden name. "Jack used your maiden name for the account," Franklin explained. "Said it'd be harder to connect to you." Smart man. I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. Why didn't he ever tell me? Franklin's eyes met mine, steady and without apology. "Because he knew you. You'd have told him you didn't need a safety net. And maybe you didn't, back then. But he worried what might happen if you found yourself surrounded by people who didn't have your best interests at heart." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I thought about Lauren's face at the kitchen table, the way her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater as she avoided my eyes. I thought about Daniel at the bank, smooth as glass until I stepped into view. "He mentioned Daniel by name," I asked. Franklin hesitated, then nodded. Said he liked the man fine at first, but there was something in his eyes, ambition without gratitude. "Jack was a good judge of character. You know that." I leaned back against the booth, my hands resting flat on the cool laminate table. The din of the diner faded under the weight of what I was hearing. Jack hadn't just suspected trouble. He'd planned for it in detail. He'd hidden money, hidden it under my maiden name, and trusted a man I'd never met to safeguard it until the right moment. "And now," I asked, "what happens next?" Franklin slid the folder across to me. "This account holds just over $480,000. Jack built it slowly. Royalties from a land lease, small investments he never talked about. You're the sole beneficiary. I've kept it in conservative funds, so it's grown steadily but quietly. Daniel doesn't know it exists, and if we move carefully, he never will." The number landed in my mind like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through every corner of my thoughts. Relief, guilt, anger, gratitude, all of it tangled together. "What do you want me to do with it?" I asked. "That's not for me to decide," Franklin said. "But I will say this. Jack wanted it to be yours. Not Lauren's, not Daniel's. Yours. He didn't want it to save you from bills or repairs. He wanted it to save you from them." I closed the folder slowly, my fingers lingering on the textured cover. The truth was, I didn't know yet what I'd do. But I knew one thing for certain: it would never be touched by the people who'd tried to write me out of my own life. "Franklin," I said quietly, "do you believe in timing? The way certain things happen exactly when they're supposed to?" He smiled faintly. "I believe in people being ready to act when the moment comes. And I think, Evelyn, you're more than ready." When I left the diner, the morning sun was higher, spilling gold across the asphalt. I carried the folder close against my chest, like it was something fragile and alive. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was on defense. I felt armed, and somewhere deep down, I knew Lauren and Daniel hadn't seen the last of me. For the next week, I kept the folder from Franklin inside the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser, underneath an old quilt my grandmother had stitched by hand. Every night before bed, I'd pull it out, run my fingertips over the papers, and feel that strange mix of power and caution thrumming in my chest. It wasn't the money itself that stirred me. It was what the money meant. A way to move without asking, a way to act without warning, a way to set the record straight on my own terms. Lauren and Daniel still hadn't called. Not once. They'd been gone a month, tucked away in a rental across town, pretending we lived in separate worlds. But Riverview is too small for that. People talk. I'd heard through Mrs. Lively at the grocery store that Daniel had been telling folks I was slipping and needed professional oversight. He was building a narrative, laying groundwork. That's when I decided. If they wanted to play in the court of public opinion, I'd meet them there. I started small. Donations to the Riverview Library, the local food bank, the Historical Society, each one made in my full name, with a note in the newsletter thanking me for my continued leadership in the community. Then I called Pastor Miller at First Baptist and offered to sponsor the church's River Clean Up project, on the condition that my granddaughter, Nora, be invited to help lead the youth group volunteers. I wanted the town to see her alongside me, to know she was still mine. While the public face of Evelyn Harper grew steadier, I was doing quieter work too. Franklin helped me open a new safe deposit box at a bank 2 towns over. I moved every important document I had into it: my updated will, my property deed, my medical directives. Then came the real move: hiring a retired paralegal named Janet Foster to start compiling a dossier on Daniel's business dealings. Janet was the kind of woman who could smile sweetly while extracting a confession out of a locked box. Over coffee at her kitchen table, she told me she'd already found a few curious transfers from my accounts in the months before the guardianship stunt. Enough to prove intent, I asked. She tapped her pen against her notepad. Enough to raise eyebrows. And in a small town, sometimes that's all you need. By the end of the second week, I'd laid my pieces on the board. Not all of them, just enough to let Lauren and Daniel feel the shift in the wind. I wasn't storming in with accusations. I was building a picture, letting them see it forming, inch by inch, until they couldn't pretend not to notice. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was a correction. A slow, deliberate reminder that I hadn't gone anywhere, and that I'd never been alone on the field. One night, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, the cicadas singing loud enough to drown my thoughts. Across the river, the last sliver of sun dipped below the trees. I thought about Jack, about Franklin, about the woman I'd been before all this, and the one I was becoming. The war had started the moment they tried to erase me. Now, I was simply choosing the terms. It was a Saturday morning in Riverview, the kind where Main Street smells like fresh bread from Donovan's bakery, and you can hear the screen doors slamming shut on half the houses in town. I was picking up peaches from the farmer's market, the sun warm on my back, when I saw her. Lauren. She was standing near the honey stand, a paper bag in her arms, her hair pulled back the way she wore it in high school. For a second, it almost disarmed me. The memory of my little girl clutching her allowance and a jar of blackberry jam. But then I remembered the kitchen table, the folder, her quiet nod when I asked if she'd known. She saw me before I could turn away. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't move. "Mom," she said finally, the single word landing heavy in the air between us. "Lauren." My voice was calm, but it didn't reach for warmth. There were people milling around. Mrs. Lively by the tomato stall, Sheriff Connolly picking out sweet corn. And in a small town, nothing draws more ears than 2 Harpers talking in public. Lauren stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to be intimate without being private. "You've been busy." "I have." I picked up another peach, tested its weight, and set it gently in my basket. "The library's looking better than it has in years." Her eyes flickered. She'd heard. They all had. My name had been in newsletters, on donation plaques, in church bulletins. I'd made sure of it. You could have called, she said. So could you, I replied. She shifted her bag in her arms. Nora misses you. The words hit their mark, but I didn't let it show. She knows where I live. The porch light's still on for her. Lauren's gaze dropped to the ground, and for a moment, I saw the smallest crack in her armor. But just as quickly, she set her jaw. Daniel says you're trying to turn the town against us. I gave the faintest smile. No, Lauren. I'm just making sure they remember who I am, before someone else tells them. Behind us, I could feel the attention of half the market. Not gawking, just listening. The way a community does when it senses the real story is between the lines. Lauren took a step back, her knuckles white around the bag. I'm trying, Mom. Then try harder. I said, my tone still even but sharp enough to draw a breath from someone nearby. She didn't answer. She just nodded once, turned, and walked away, her figure weaving through the crowd until she was gone. I paid for my peaches, slipped them into my tote, and left the market with my head high. The war was no longer quiet. It happened 2 weeks later, at the annual Riverview Heritage Picnic. The kind of event where everyone brings a casserole, kids run underfoot, and the mayor gives the same speech about our proud traditions. He's given for 20 years. I was sitting under the shade of the big oak near the gazebo, chatting with Pastor Miller's wife, when I felt the air shift. A low murmur passed through the crowd, and then I saw him, Daniel. He was striding across the lawn in a crisp white button, down sleeves rolled just so, his smile practiced for the benefit of anyone watching. He had a knack for reading a room. Until he didn't. Evelyn, he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. We need to talk. Every conversation within earshot seemed to pause. I set down my lemonade, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Daniel. To what do I owe the pleasure? He didn't bother sitting. You've been telling people lies about me. About Lauren. You're poisoning this town against us. I tilted my head. If the town's turning, maybe you should ask yourself why. His jaw flexed. You think you're untouchable because you've got a little nest egg stashed somewhere. People see through that act. The words hung heavy in the summer air. Somewhere behind me, someone gasped. I let the silence stretch before I spoke. Daniel, this isn't about money. It's about trust. And you burned yours to the ground. His composure cracked. Just a flicker, but enough for the crowd to see. You've made a mistake, Evelyn. You think you can win this little war, but I promise you. I stood, slow and deliberate, until I was looking him directly in the eye. No, Daniel, you already lost. The day you walked into that bank and tried to erase me, you lost. Everything since has just been you pretending you didn't. There was no shouting. No grand theatrics. Just the two of us, locked in a quiet standoff, while the people of Riverview watched and took mental notes. Finally, he stepped back, muttered something I didn't catch, and walked off toward the parking lot. The crowd's murmur swelled again, this time warmer, more certain. I could feel the shift, subtle but real. Daniel's mask had cracked, and everyone had seen the fracture. 3 days after the picnic, Janet Foster called me just after lunch. Her voice had that clipped, careful tone that meant she was sitting on something big. Evelyn, she said, I've got what you asked for. And then some. An hour later, I was at her kitchen table. The scent of fresh coffee in the air, and a thick manila envelope in front of me. Janet slid it over like she was passing classified intelligence. Inside was a stack of printed bank records, each with Daniel's name threaded through in a way that was impossible to mistake. Transfers from my old accounts into his business, listed as consulting fees and state management reimbursements. Nearly every one of them dated in the 6 months before the guardianship stunt, but the real gut punch was at the back. A photocopy of a check made out to cash, my signature forged in a sloppy imitation of my hand. I stared at it for a long moment before speaking. Can we prove this is fake? Janet smiled faintly. Already lined up a handwriting expert, and the bank's security cameras showed Daniel depositing it himself. A slow, cold satisfaction settled over me. Not joy, I wouldn't call it that, but the sense of something finally locking into place. What about Lauren? Her name isn't on the transfers, Janet said carefully. But she signed the new business account where the money landed. That ties her in. I sat back, my mind whirring. Part of me still ached at the thought of dragging my own daughter into a legal storm. But another part, the part that had sat in that bank lobby listening to Daniel declare me mentally gone, knew there was no turning back. File it, I said finally. Whatever we need to open a case, start it. Janet nodded. We'll move fast and discreet. That night, I sat on my porch with the ledger copies in my lap, the cicadas loud in the dark. Across the river, the town lights twinkled, oblivious to the storm building. For the first time since this began, I wasn't just reacting. I had evidence, leverage, a way to make them answer not just to me, but to the law. And deep down I knew, once this left my hands and entered a courtroom, there would be no undoing it. Richard Coleman was good, steady, experienced. The kind of lawyer who'd weathered half the divorces and land disputes in Riverview for 3 decades. But when he looked over Janet's findings, he leaned back in his chair and said, Evelyn, this is going to get ugly fast, and I think you're going to need someone who thrives in ugly. That's how I met Amelia Cross. She wasn't what I expected. Barely in her 30s, with sharp green eyes and a confidence that filled the room before she even sat down. Her suit was charcoal gray, crisp in a way that made me feel like she ironed it herself just to prove a point. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm enough to make me believe she'd already decided to win. Mrs. Harper, she began. I've read everything Janet compiled. This isn't just a guardianship overreach. It's financial exploitation, forgery, and potentially fraud across state lines. Her voice was quick, precise, but not cold. She was talking about my life, my family, and yet she delivered it like a doctor explaining the treatment for an infection. Direct, necessary, and with no hint of apology. What's the first step? I asked. Amelia slid a legal pad across the table. We build a timeline. Every incident, every transaction, every conversation that supports intent. We get sworn affidavits from bank employees, handwriting experts, anyone who can confirm these signatures are forged. And we do it before your daughter and son-in-law realize how much we know. I hesitated at the mention of Lauren. The idea of seeing her name on a court document, across from mine, sat heavy in my stomach. And if she tries to claim she didn't know? Amelia's gaze didn't waver. Then we prove otherwise. Co-signing that account ties her in. Whether she admits it or not is irrelevant to the law. For a moment, the room felt too small. Not because of Amelia, but because the reality was finally settling in. This wasn't just a private family fracture anymore. This was going to be public, documented, permanent. Amelia must have seen something in my face because her tone softened. Evelyn, I know this isn't easy, but predators, especially the ones in your own family, count on you being too ashamed to fight back. The fact that you're here tells me you're not one of their easy cases. That struck something in me. She didn't see me as a victim. She saw me as someone choosing to fight. By the time I left her office, we had a planned preliminary filings within 2 weeks, subpoenas to the bank, a private investigator to track Daniel's recent financial movements. Walking to my car, I felt that same restless tug I'd felt the morning I walked into the bank. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was momentum. The storm was no longer building. It was here, and I was standing in the center, ready to make it mine. It started with a knock at my door, sharp and deliberate, the kind that carries a message. When I opened it, a young man in a navy windbreaker handed me a large envelope. Service of process, ma'am, he said, polite but brisk, before turning on his heel. Inside was my own declaration of war, the preliminary filing Amelia had promised. forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Each count laid out in clean legal language that left no room for misunderstanding. I knew these papers were also being delivered to Lauren and Daniel at that very moment. And sure enough, by late afternoon, my phone lit up. The first call was from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Daniel's voice came through, tight with controlled rage. "You think you can drag us through the mud? You're going to regret this, Evelyn. You don't know who you're messing with." The second call was Lauren's. This one I answered. "Mom." Her voice was shaky. "Why are you doing this?" I leaned against the counter, looking out the kitchen window at the river. "Because you forced my hand. We were trying to protect you." "No, Lauren." I cut in. "You were trying to protect your comfort. And you gambled that I'd be too old, too tired, or too ashamed to fight. You lost." On the other end, she took a shaky breath. "Daniel says you're ruining our lives." I almost laughed. "Funny. That's exactly what I thought you were doing to mine." Silence stretched between us, thick enough to touch. Then she spoke, quieter this time. "You're really going to take this to court?" "I'm going to take it wherever it needs to go," I said. "And if you want it to stop Lauren, you know exactly where to start, with the truth." I hung up before she could answer. That night, Amelia called. "They've retained counsel, a big firm out of Baton Rouge. That means they're scared enough to spend money." I sat in my armchair, the folder from Franklin on the side table, my journal open on my lap. Outside, the cicadas were loud, but I could still hear the distant hum of the river. "They should be scared," I said, because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't just holding my ground. I was advancing. The mediation room smelled faintly of coffee and copier toner, the scent of compromises and grudges trying to coexist. A long oak table divided the space, polished to a shine that reflected the overhead lights. Amelia sat to my right, a slim folder of notes in front of her, her pen poised but still. Across from us, Daniel and Lauren sat side by side, their attorney, a gray, suited man with the kind of expensive watch that said I bill by the minute. Between them, the mediator, a calm woman in her 50s, began with the usual script. "We're here to explore the possibility of resolution before this proceeds to full litigation. I ask that we keep voices measured and comments respectful." Daniel didn't even wait for her to finish. "There's nothing to resolve. This is a family misunderstanding being blown out of proportion." Amelia leaned forward slightly. "A misunderstanding does not involve forged signatures, unauthorized transfers, and a guardianship petition filed without consent." Lauren's eyes flickered toward me, but she didn't speak. The mediator turned to me. "Mrs. Harper, is there anything you'd like to say directly?" I rested my hands flat on the table. "Yes. I want it on record that I am not interested in financial settlements or conditional agreements. I want full revocation of any legal claims they've made over my affairs, public acknowledgement of the forgery, and restitution for what was taken. Nothing less." Lauren flinched, her voice finally breaking through. "Mom, please, if we could just talk privately." "This is me talking to you, Lauren," I said evenly. "The difference is that now there are witnesses." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You think dragging us into court is going to make you the hero in this town?" I met his gaze without blinking. "I'm not trying to be the hero, Daniel. I'm just making sure you can't be the villain quietly." The mediator cleared her throat, trying to steer us back, but the room's temperature had already shifted. Amelia slid a single page across the table toward their attorney. "This is the handwriting analysis on the forged check, along with the bank's security footage. You'll want to review that before your clients commit to trial." Their lawyer scanned the document, his expression unreadable. Lauren's face drained of color. Daniel's composure cracked, just a flicker of something raw before the mask came back down. The mediator tried again. "Shall we take a short break?" No one answered. The silence in that room was louder than any shouting match could have been. When we finally stood, Amelia whispered to me as we walked out, "They're rattled." That's the first crack. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I felt it, the shift. The slow, inevitable tilting of the board in my favor. Amelia had gone to pull the car around, while I waited in the lobby of the mediation center, my folder hugged tight against my chest. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the kind that tries to disguise how many arguments the walls have heard. That's when I saw Lauren slip out of the conference room side door. Daniel wasn't with her. She scanned the hall like she was afraid to be seen, then walked toward me, slow, hesitant. "Mom," she said softly, almost like a question. I kept my voice neutral. "Your lawyer forget something?" She glanced over her shoulder before answering. "No. I needed to talk to you alone." The words landed heavy, wrapped in a tone I hadn't heard from her in years. She looked younger in that moment, like the teenager who used to knock on my bedroom door after a fight just to curl up at the foot of my bed. "I know you think I was in on everything," she began, her voice low. And I was. At least, I didn't stop it. "But there's more you don't know." I didn't move, didn't speak. Let her fill the silence. "Daniel didn't just want control of your accounts," she continued. "He needed it. His business, it's worse than he's told anyone. The bank's about to call in loans he can't cover. If he files bankruptcy, everything he's touched in the last 2 years gets dragged in, including me, including Nora's college fund." Her voice cracked on that last part, and she pressed her lips together, holding back more than words. "You're telling me this now because—" I asked, careful to keep the steel in my tone. "Because I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just for me, for her. If this goes public and his creditors start digging, I don't know what they'll find. I don't know what else he's used your name for." That last sentence was like ice down my spine. "Are you saying there's more forgery?" She shook her head, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty. "I don't know. But if there is, I need you to be ready." I let a long beat pass before I said, "Lauren, readiness stopped being the question the day you signed those papers. The question now is whether you're willing to help me find the rest of the truth." She swallowed hard. "If I help you, will you protect Nora?" That one was easy. Always. Before Amelia returned, Lauren slipped back through the side door, leaving me with the weight of her words. As we drove away, I didn't tell Amelia right away. I just stared out at the slow, winding streets of Riverview, the pieces rearranging themselves in my mind. Daniel's fight with me might not have been about guardianship at all. It might have been about hiding something much bigger. And if Lauren was right, the real storm hadn't even started. The morning after Lauren's confession, I called Amelia before the sun was fully up. My voice was low, steady. "There's more to this," I told her. "Daniel's broke, and if he's desperate enough to forge my name once, he's desperate enough to have done it again." By mid-morning, Amelia had looped in Janet, and the three of us sat around Janet's kitchen table, coffee steaming between us, the blinds drawn like we were plotting a bank heist. Amelia opened her laptop, fingers flying over the keys. "If what Lauren says is true, we need to find every business Daniel's tied to, every loan in his name, every shared asset. And we need to move before his creditors do." Janet handed me a stack of printouts. "I've already started on the local level. But this," she tapped the papers, "this goes further. He's registered shell companies in Baton Rouge, and even one in Texas. And at least 2 of them list you as a silent partner." The words slammed into me like a cold wave. I never signed anything. Amelia didn't look surprised. That's what I was afraid of. If those filings hold your forged signature, it's not just fraud. It's interstate fraud. Federal level. Janet slid another paper across. "And here's the worst part. One of those companies took out a line of credit last year. 200,000. Payments are months behind. If the bank comes after him, they can try to come after you too, because your name is on the paperwork." I felt my throat tighten, but not with fear, with focus. Then we prove it's a forgery before they can even knock on my door. Amelia leaned back in her chair. We're going to need more than handwriting experts. We need someone inside. Someone who's worked with Daniel's business and knows how sloppy he's gotten. Janet smirked faintly. I might know someone. His old bookkeeper. Quit 6 months ago over ethical differences. Lives out near Lake Providence. She owes me a favor. For the first time that morning, I let myself exhale. Set it up. Amelia closed her laptop with a soft click. Evelyn, I need you to understand. If we go down this road, it's not just a family case anymore. This will make headlines. And Daniel's not the type to go down quietly. I met her eyes. Neither am I. Later that night, I sat on my porch with my journal, the river moving slow and steady beyond the yard. I wrote just one line. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn the bridge they're using to cross. I underlined it twice, because I knew, before this was over, something was going to burn. The road to Lake Providence was long and flat, lined with fields just beginning to turn gold in the late summer heat. Amelia drove, her hands steady on the wheel, while I kept the manila folder from Janet balanced on my lap. Every so often, I'd catch myself thumbing the edges, the paper warm under my fingers, like the truth inside was radiating heat. We found the house, a small, white clapboard place with a screened porch and wind chimes that clinked in the breeze. A woman in her early 40s opened the door before we could knock. You must be Evelyn, she said, offering her hand. Name's Cara Boone. Come on in. Inside smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee. Cara led us to the kitchen, where a thick binder sat on the table. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I quit working for Daniel because I didn't want my name tied to what he was doing. She began flipping open the binder. Double books, fake invoices, personal expenses written off as business losses. I told him it was illegal. He told me to mind my own business. Amelia leaned forward. We're looking for anything with Evelyn's forged signature. Cara pulled out a folder labeled LLC Filings MISC and slid it across the table. 3 documents here. 2 for that shell company in Baton Rouge, 1 for a partnership in Texas. I compared them to a real signature from your bank forms. Evelyn, the forgeries are bad, but just good enough to slip past someone who isn't looking closely. I felt my jaw tighten as I scanned the pages. Seeing my name there, written in a hand that pretended to be mine, was like reading a stranger's diary about my life. And it's worse, Cara continued. That Texas partnership took out a loan last year, $500,000. The money was moved through 3 different accounts in under 48 hours, and one of those accounts was in Daniel's name alone. Amelia's pen scratched across her legal pad. Can you testify to this? Cara nodded. With documentation. I kept copies. I knew one day someone would come asking. She pushed the binder toward me. Evelyn, I've seen men like him. They don't stop until someone makes them. Her words landed heavy. I thought about Lauren, about Nora, about the shame that had kept me quiet in those first days after the bank. That shame was gone now, replaced by something colder, sharper. When we left, the binder was in Amelia's hands. Cara stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching us go. Good luck, she called after us. And don't let him make you feel small. The drive back was quiet, but in my chest, I could feel the ground shifting again. With Cara's testimony and her binder, this wasn't just my word against Daniel's anymore. This was evidence. And evidence doesn't blink, doesn't stammer, doesn't look away. It was the beginning of the end, though for who exactly remained to be seen. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning, when Mrs. Lively from the grocery store called me before I'd even finished my coffee. Evelyn, honey, have you seen the Gazette? I hadn't. But 10 minutes later, I was standing on my porch, flipping open the latest issue of the Riverview Gazette, and there it was. Front page, bottom half. Local woman's mental fitness questioned amid family dispute. My name wasn't in the headline, but the first paragraph made it clear who they meant. Sources close to the Harper family report concerns about the mental stability of widow Evelyn Harper, 68, following a pattern of erratic financial decisions and estrangement from her only daughter. I could practically hear Daniel's voice in those words, polite, concerned, calculated to plant doubt without making any outright accusations. By noon, I'd already had 2, friendly, calls from church ladies offering to bring casseroles, one neighbor hinting that, maybe this lawsuit is too stressful for you at your age. Amelia was livid when I called her. They're trying to control the narrative, she said. It's classic. Paint you as unstable so any testimony you give is suspect. They'll believe him, I said, my voice flat. He's charming. He's been here long enough to know how to make people feel sorry for him. Then we fight it head on. Amelia replied, we'll put you in front of the right people, show them exactly how sharp you are. Public events, interviews, community meetings. Anywhere you can be seen and heard. On your terms. That night I sat on my porch, the Gazette folded beside me like a taunt. The river was black under the moon, the air thick with the smell of jasmine from the yard. I thought about Kara's binder, about Franklin's folder, about the trust in Nora's name. If Daniel wanted to fight in public, I'd meet him there. But I wouldn't match him with whispers and planted stories. I'd do it by making myself impossible to erase, not in the bank, not in the town, not in the eyes of the people who mattered. I picked up my pen and wrote one sentence in my journal. The best revenge is being undeniable. I underlined it once, hard enough to dent the page. 2 Saturdays later, the Riverview Heritage Association hosted its annual summer gathering on the courthouse lawn. Usually I went for the peach cobbler and the chance to see old friends. This year, I went for something else entirely. Amelia had helped arrange it quietly. I'd be giving a short talk about community stewardship, harmless enough on the program, but we both knew it would be my chance to speak where the whole town could hear. The lawn was dotted with folding chairs, kids weaving between picnic tables, and the smell of grilled corn in the air. Daniel was there too, standing near the lemonade stand, his smile easy as he shook hands. Lauren hovered beside him, eyes darting toward me more than once. When my name was called, I walked to the small wooden platform at the front. I didn't use the notes Amelia had helped me prepare. I just gripped the sides of the lectern and looked out at faces I'd known my whole life. I was born in this town, I began, my voice carrying across the crowd. I've seen it through hurricanes, floods, and more than a few political squabbles. And I've always believed the strength of Riverview is in how we take care of each other. A few nods from the older folks up front. Daniel shifted his weight. But lately, I continued, I've been reminded that taking care of each other doesn't just mean casseroles when someone's sick, or a helping hand when someone's barn roof leaks. It means protecting the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's family. The crowd was quiet now, every word settling like dust in still air. I've been told, I said, letting my eyes sweep toward Daniel, that age means weakness. That getting older means you can be spoken for instead of spoken to. That your voice can be signed away on a piece of paper without you ever holding the pen. I'm here to tell you, that's a lie. A murmur ran through the crowd. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm still here. I'm still thinking, deciding, and living on my own terms. And I'll keep doing that for as long as I have breath in my body. Not because I'm special, but because no one else gets to decide when my light goes out. That's my choice. Always. I let the silence hang for a beat before finishing. And for those who've asked, yes, my porch light is still on. For anyone who comes in honesty. For anyone who remembers what trust looks like. I stepped down to a smattering of applause that grew louder, warmer. People came up to shake my hand, clap my shoulder. And though no one said it out loud, I could feel it. The narrative had shifted. Daniel walked away before I could see his face. Lauren stayed a moment longer. watching me with an expression I couldn't read. That night, when I got home, the Gazette's reporter had already left me a voicemail asking for a quote. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Daniel didn't even wait a day to react. By Monday morning, Riverview was buzzing, not about my speech, but about the furious letter he'd sent to the Gazette. They printed it in full, front and center, under the headline, "Local Businessman Danny's Wrongdoing." Calls allegations baseless. Most of it was bluster, claiming I was misremembering events, that any financial overlap between us had been fully consensual. But halfway down, there it was, in black and white. As Mrs. Harper knows, the funds in question were moved into Harper and Pierce Consulting, an entity she co-signed for in 2021. I read that sentence 3 times. My hand wasn't shaking, not from anger, not from fear. It was something else entirely. Because I had never once, in any setting, public or private, mentioned the name Harper and Pierce Consulting. Not to the Gazette, not to Amelia, not to anyone outside our legal prep. He just put it in print. On record. When I called Amelia, I barely got the words out before she cut in. "Evelyn, this is it. This is the slip we've been waiting for," she explained quickly. "By naming the entity, he's publicly tying you to it and admitting funds moved there. That's not just a statement, that's a confession. And since we can prove your signature on the registration is forged, we have him admitting to using a business you never legally authorized." Within an hour, Amelia had the Gazette's issues scanned and filed as an exhibit. She was already drafting a motion to include it in the case. "If the judge allows this in, it undermines every claim they've made about your consent," she said. That night, I sat on my porch with the paper folded beside me, the summer air thick with the scent of honeysuckle. Across the river, the lights shimmered on the water. The town going about its business, unaware that one sentence had just shifted the ground under Daniel's feet. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt the scales tilt just slightly in my direction. And I knew Daniel had just made his first unfixable mistake. By Wednesday morning, Amelia had already filed the motion. The hearing to admit Daniel's letter into evidence was set for the following week. Far sooner than I expected. She told me it was the perfect moment to apply pressure. And that's when Lauren called. Her voice was tight, the kind of voice that comes from not sleeping well. "Mom, can we meet? Just us." I hesitated. "Why now?" "Because you've got him cornered, and he knows it," she said, the words rushing out. "He's not handling it well. He's talking about moving money, about selling the business before the court date. If he does that, it'll get messy for everyone, including me." We met at Riverview Park, where the swings squeaked in the wind and the river slid past in its slow, muddy way. She looked pale, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "Daniel says you're trying to humiliate us," she began. I kept my tone even. "Daniel humiliated himself the day he forged my signature." She winced but didn't argue. "If I testify, if I tell them I didn't know about the forgeries, only the guardianship, will that be enough to protect me?" "Lauren," I said, "the truth is the only thing that will protect you now. All of it, not just the parts that keep you clean." Her eyes filled, but she blinked hard. "If I do this, he'll never forgive me." I let the silence stretch, letting her feel the weight of the choice. "And if you don't, you might lose more than his forgiveness. You could lose your freedom, and you'll lose me for good." She looked away toward the water, the wind tugging at her hair. I could almost see the battle behind her eyes. The loyalty, the fear, the shame. Finally, she whispered, "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long," I said. "The river's moving, whether you're ready or not." That night, Amelia called with news the judge had granted our motion. Daniel's letter was officially part of the case. "This accelerates the timeline," she said. "If Lauren's going to flip, now's the time." I hung up, stepped onto my porch, and turned on the light. Not just for Nora this time. For Lauren, too. if she had the courage to walk toward it. The courthouse in Riverview had never felt so small. Every bench was filled. Neighbors, church members, even the Gazette's reporter perched in the back with her notepad ready. The air was thick with anticipation. That quiet hum of people who know they're about to witness something that will be talked about for years. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Amelia, my hands folded in front of me, Franklin's old folder and Kara's binder stacked neatly at my side. Across the aisle, Daniel looked polished but taut, his jaw tight enough to crack a tooth. Lauren sat one seat away from him, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. The judge entered, and the room rose. After the preliminaries, the witness list was called. Lauren Harper Pierce. She stood smoothing her skirt and walked to the stand. Every step seemed heavier than the last. She was sworn in, her right hand trembling just enough for me to notice. Daniel's lawyer began with soft questions about the guardianship, painting it as an act of care in case of future decline. Lauren's answers were measured, almost mechanical. I knew this was the script they'd rehearsed. Then Amelia stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Pierce, she began. Can you tell the court when you first became aware that your mother's signature appeared on documents tied to Harper and Pierce Consulting? Lauren's lips parted. This was the moment. Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, then to me. For a heartbeat, I saw the little girl who used to climb into my lap with scraped knees. I became aware, she said slowly, the day I signed the guardianship papers. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Daniel's head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing. And did you believe those signatures were genuine? Amelia asked. Lauren hesitated. The silence stretched, the judge's gaze sharpened. Finally, she said, no. I suspected they weren't. But I didn't ask. Because if I didn't ask, I wouldn't have to stop him. It was like the air had been punched out of the room. Daniel's lawyer scrambled to object, but the judge overruled. The answer would stand. Lauren's voice gained strength as she went on. My mother didn't know about the business loans, the shell companies. She didn't sign those papers. I let Daniel convince me it was harmless, that it was for later. But it wasn't. It was theft, and I was complicit. Daniel's face darkened, his composure unraveling in front of everyone. You ungrateful. He started, but the judge cut him off sharply. When Lauren stepped down from the stand, she didn't look at him. She walked past the defense table without slowing, her shoulders squared, her gaze fixed ahead. Amelia leaned toward me. That's it, she whispered. We've got them. The verdict would come until the following week, but I already knew. The tide had turned, and it wasn't going back. That night, I sat on my porch. The cicadas loud in the warm air, the porch light glowing steady. Nora would still have a place here. And now, maybe, just maybe, so would Lauren in time. I wrote in my journal, you don't win every battle by force. Sometimes, you win by letting the truth stand where the lies used to be. I closed the book and left the porch light on. For both of us. The verdict came on a Tuesday morning. The courtroom was half full. Most folks had returned to their routines now that the fireworks were over. The judge's voice was steady, almost casual, as she read the decision. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Evelyn Harper, on all counts. Daniel was ordered to repay every cent he had taken, plus penalties. The forged business filings were voided, and the guardianship petition was formally struck from the record. Lauren's cooperation spared her from legal penalty, but the judge's closing words were clear. You came close to losing more than you realize. Learn from it. Outside, the air was warm. Sunlight spilling across the courthouse steps. Daniel stalked off without a word, his lawyer trailing behind. Lauren lingered at the bottom of the steps, her purse clutched tight. Eyes on me. I meant what I said, she murmured when I reached her. About earning back your trust. I studied her for a long moment. Then start small. Start honest. We didn't hug, but we didn't turn away either. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, the river moving slow and sure beyond the yard. The house felt different now, lighter, quieter, mine again. Nora came by after school, bounding up the steps with her backpack swinging. She sat beside me, legs dangling off the edge, chattering about homework and a new friend in art class. When she paused, she noticed the porch light glowing in the soft dusk. "You always keep it on?" she asked. "For the people who belong here," I said, "even if they forget the way for a while." Later, after she left, I opened my journal one last time for this chapter of my life. Let no one speak for you who wouldn't fight for you. And when you fight, fight in the open. I closed the book and set it on the table beside me. The light shone steady against the dark, casting its glow over the steps, the yard, the river beyond. Not as a beacon for trouble, but as a welcome home. If this story taught me anything, it's that silence is a gift to those who would take from you. Speaking up, even when your voice shakes, is how you draw the line between being forgotten and being remembered. Protect your name, your choices, and your voice, because no one else will guard them the way you can. Trust can be rebuilt, but only if it starts with truth. If this story resonated with you, share it so more people remember that age does not erase wisdom. Leave a comment telling me, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? And don't forget to like and subscribe to Telling Story with me for more true stories of strength, betrayal, and the quiet kind of justice that changes everything.